Okay, this is James Dulgeroff, JD, your professor for Econ 200. And this is the screencast for the week beginning April 15th. This is week 3. We're talking about chapter 3. And soon you will see in the announcements section that I will link you to an every Monday screencast. If I don't post it on Monday, then certainly it will be available sometime on Tuesday. In the beginning of the week, Monday or Tuesday, I'm talking about the quiz that's going to be on the following Sunday. So, and usually these will be, in the announcement, I'll link you not to the information. The course link will be to the content area, which you can always get to, of course, by going to the course menu, right? You can I show the course menu here, and announcements information is just the syllabus and the introductory stuff and any PowerPoints that I'm using. And then content. In the content area, you will find an every Monday screencast with answers to the weekly quiz posted at the beginning of the week that I'm talking about. This is for week 3, and you can click in and you will see inside the folder that screencast. Okay, so I just want you to be aware that this is where you can go, and most people actually are working ahead of schedule, right? And so that's very good. Thank you very much. And so this week, we are doing chapter 3. It's week 3. We're doing chapter 3. Of course, you can't go past these due dates in Rebel. So I'm encouraging you to work ahead of schedule so that when you see the screencast on April 15th, ideally you've done everything in chapter 3, and on the 15th, the week, April 15th through 21st, you're at least, you've done everything, the concept checks and the homework, and you're just waiting for the Monday screencast where I think this week I'm giving you half. There's 12 quiz questions. I'm going to coach you on 6 out of those 12 questions. So certainly word to the wise would be definitely the model would be, the model student would be really waiting for that screencast. I've done everything in chapter 3, all of the concept checks, all of the homework, any practice. Sometimes I give you a section with practice, sometimes I don't. But certainly you've got everything done all the way down, and you're just, when April 15th comes, my Monday screencast, you're ready on Tuesday or Wednesday. You don't want to go all the way up to the 21st. You don't want to press these deadlines, believe me, because if something goes wrong, there's no way I can't reset a quiz. I can't set back the deadlines for individual students. That is a disadvantage of the Revell system. So the only thing I can say is, as long as you're using a Chrome browser, there shouldn't be too much trouble with actually accessing and properly accessing electronically the exercises and doing the graphs, right? So this is one where you have more graphs in chapter 3. So also, I want to note that, as you're going forward, we do skip chapter 4. Usually I'll get some emails. Oh my gosh, what about chapter 4? Well, we're skipping chapter 4, as you can see, right? Just coming attractions, right? After you're done with chapter 3, go ahead and work ahead. You can work 2 or 3 weeks ahead of schedule. That way you've got comfortable cushion to take these quizzes, right? You've got everything done and you're just waiting April 15th, I post the every Monday screencast, which gives you answers to Chapter 3's quiz. And then you're done with that for the week, and you're running ahead to the next chapter. I'm just, putting you on notice that we do skip Chapter 4. I know it's not a mistake. Chapter 5 is on externalities. This would be the beginning of week 4. And there you will see me posting a, like in week 4, I will post a discussion board where you just kind of watch the video, and it's about, excuse me, it's about externalities, environmental policy, and public goods. And I think that the movie is Before the Flood. It's available on Netflix, on YouTube, on Amazon. With a subscription to Amazon, I think. And there is a format that you can find which will be accessible, but we want to wait until I post the discussion board, because there's very specific questions that you'll answer as you watch this movie. But that will be in week 4, so be on the lookout for that. All right. Yes, we do skip Chapter 4, and then start working ahead in Chapter 5. There's no assignments in 4. If you're working ahead, yes, we do skip the chapter. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6 come next, right? If you're working, you can work 3 weeks ahead in all these assignments, and you could just be waiting for that coaching that I give you on the quiz. So anyway, that's the way that things work. Now, let's get started on this quiz. Again, even though there's an indication that you can save and come back to questions. Well, if you're on a question, you can never come back to it. But you only get one attempt to answer these. So I would sit down and take the whole thing at one sitting. Right? Once again, most people are doing this, which is very good. Now let's see here. Question number 1. Is a assumption that we make whenever we look at the relationship between price and quantity demanded, or between in the buyer's market, or price and quantity supplied for the seller's market. We're only looking at the relationship between price and, say, quantity demanded if we're looking at market demand. And all of the other things that could cause an individual to want to buy more of something, things like, hey, if your income increases, or you see a commercial on television, your tastes and preferences for the good would increase, right? Things that could change how much you want to buy other than the price of the good, right? So when we draw a demand curve, which we'll be doing in this chapter, when we draw that relationship, that negative relationship, that inverse relationship, such that when price decreases, quantity demanded increases, or when price rises, quantity demanded falls, that relationship exists. Ceteris paribus means these other things besides the price that could change how much you want to buy, we are holding all of those other things equal, okay? In other words, they don't change. So that's an important assumption when you draw a demand curve. So if we go to the second question now. Question number 2, you can see that there's 2 things that make the quantity demanded of a good increase. One is if you decrease the price, you move from A to B, that's movement along a demand curve because of a price change. That causes the quantity demanded to increase. Okay, so if price falls, people buy more as you go from A to B. That's movement along a demand curve, right? Now that's when that happens, we say the price falls, the quantity demanded increases. But if we go from point A to point C, the price is still the same. If the price is the same, then it must be one of those other things besides the price, those ceteris paribus things. It must be one of those other things besides the price that's causing us to want to buy more. Say, an increase in income or a change in tastes and preferences after watching an advertisement, right? So when we go from A to C, we don't say that's an increase in quantity demanded is A to B. An increase or a change in demand as we go from A to C, there's been no change in price. It's one of those other things besides the price that causes a change in demand. Holding constant those other things besides the price, as you go from A to B, it's correct to say price decreases, quantity demanded increases if you get movement along a demand curve. Now, there's two versions of this, I believe, where, right, if you go from point A to point B, that's a change in quantity demanded. If you go from point A to point C, that's a change in demand. We say the demand increases. From A to B, we say the quantity demanded increases. A to C, there's been no change in the price. It's one of those other things besides the price. So there has truly been a change in demand. See, along D1, there's been no change in demand, only a change in quantity demanded if you go from point A to point B. Now, depending on which version of this question you get, it's going to be maybe a different answer for your version, right? Different students are going to get different versions. Let me see if I can get the system to give me, well, this one's a change in demand too. Let me see if I can get another. There we go. Now look at this version of the. Okay, if you get movement along a demand curve, right? You go from point A to point B. It's correct to say that's price decreases, quantity demanded increases. See, there's a difference between a change in demand, A to C, and a change in quantity demanded, point A to point B. It's just the way we use the language to describe what's happening. Okay. Now I want to go to question 3. Consider the demand for condominiums illustrated in the figure. What demographic change would likely result in the demand for condominiums shifting to the left? If you shift to the left toward the origin, that's a decrease in demand. Okay. So condominium living is, I suppose, get rid of the big house. The kids are out of the house, I guess, and get into a condominium. If the proportion of the population that is elderly decreases, that would decrease the demand for these condominiums, right? Let me see if I can get the other version of number 3. Yeah, okay. Consider the demand for condominiums illustrated in the figure to the right. What demographic change would likely result in the demand for condominiums actually shift to the right? It means that at any given price, there would be an increase in demand, right? Shift to the right is an increase. Well, what if the proportion of the population that is elderly increases and these people are elderly folks are, the kids are out of the house, and so we're going to economize on, on rooms to clean and, and yards to mow and stuff like that. If we're elderly, again, you may not necessarily know this, but it is true that as we have a larger proportion of elderly, that increases the demand for the condominium type of living, right? Which you may or may not know, which is why I went over this one the way I did. And again, you get different versions, but it's all focused on the same market, right? Number 3, moving ahead to, that's number 3, I'm sorry. Let's go to number 5. Number 5, this is about substitutes. One of the other things that could change the demand is substitutes, right? if you think that Coke and Pepsi are substitutes, then if the price of one rises, it increases the demand for the other quite naturally. If the two goods are substitutes, right? Goods can be related to one another as substitutes, you see in the chapter. Sri Lanka is one of the major tea producing nations in the world, and a substantial portion of the country's tea production gets exported to various countries, including the United Arab Emirates, Russia, and other countries in the Middle East. Given the success in these countries, Sri Lanka decided to foray into the Asian market. Research evidence indicated that people in Myanmar are major consumers of tea, and that since there's such a high demand for tea in that country, right, this convinced industry experts in Sri Lanka that they could export tea to Myanmar, and it was a good idea. Even though Sri Lankan tea was priced competitively, sales in Myanmar turned out to be far lower than expected. Which of the following, if true, could explain this outcome? Well, people in Myanmar are willing to pay more for their own domestic tea brands than for foreign brands. In other words, the assumption that Sri Lankan tea was a good substitute for the domestically produced tea in Myanmar is incorrect. In other words, people like their tea that's domestically produced. It's like if I said, oh, I like Coca-Cola, but I think Pepsi tastes like soap. Then, even if I did competitively price Pepsi, it wouldn't change the demand for Coca-Cola if I'm a loyal Coca-Cola drinker and I don't see the two goods as substitutes. All right. So this is what maybe got the experts in Sri Lanka who thought this would work. Not so much, as it turns out. Didn't work so well because people in Myanmar don't see their domestic tea brand as a substitute for Sri Lankan tea. Obviously, they don't think it tastes as good, right? And so this strategic plan didn't work. Okay. Number seven, I say. Number seven. Okay. In recent, there's been supposed recent changes to immigration laws have increased the supply of immigrant labor, decreasing wages in manual occupations. How might this affect the market for construction? Okay, if there's more immigrant labor, again, there obviously, one of the objections to, quote, open borders is that it gives us a large supply of unskilled workers, and that might push down, with a larger supply of labor, that could push down wages in occupations where you don't have to have a college degree to do this, right? They're thinking construction in this question. Okay, so what would that do? We're looking at the price and the quantity of a good being sold. Okay, this is not I don't think this is the labor market. Okay, this is how might it affect the market for construction. I don't know if this is new houses or something like that, but obviously, if there's a larger supply of immigrant labor, I believe, in manual occupations in construction, then that would put downward pressure on wages and lead to, that's a lower cost of production, right? So at any given price, if cost is lower, they can produce more than before. That's an increase in supply. Now, there's another version of this question, if I can get it. Here we go. Yeah. Suppose recent changes in immigration laws have decreased the supply of immigrant labor, that we're getting much more stringent about our immigration laws and enforcement, and we don't have such a large supply of immigrant labor in manual occupations. This would mean that we have a lower supply of those workers and that would push the costs of production up, right? If labor costs more, that adds to the cost of production. Now, this looks like, right, the cost is going up, but the supply is decreasing, right? For any given quantity is going to cost more to produce than before with higher labor costs. And so at any given price, there's a lower supply when you're talking about this version of question number 7. So be careful when you look at number 7. Again, different students are going to get different situations in this market, but it is about immigration either way, right? In one version, immigration laws are more strict, and we're decreasing the supply of immigrant labor. In the previous one that I just talked about, the previous version of question 7, there was an increase in the supply of immigrant labor, right? And so you can see where what we do with immigration could impact markets. And of course, that's true. Okay, so number 11 is the next one that I want to look at. So let's go to number 11. Here, consider the market for college textbooks. Different versions, again, be careful. When you draw the curve, don't be sure to, once you draw that curve, be sure to pull down the box and label the curve, right? You know, like this one's an increase in demand. Why? Well, there's different versions of this, but the market is always the same as the market for college textbooks. Suppose that in the market for college textbooks, a recent recession has led, again, this happens very often when we go into a recession. There's not a lot of economic opportunities, and so students coming out of high school not seeing very many jobs available will go to college. This increases the college-going population. If you're looking at that impact, certainly that is an increased taste for going to college, right? If there's not other opportunities out there, we know college enrollments go up when the economy is not doing well. Okay, there's a strong relationship there that you may not be aware of, but this would definitely increase the demand for textbooks as you have more students going to school. Now, there's a different version of this same market, right? I'm going to try to get, here it is. This is an effect that would decrease the demand. Suppose a recent recession has resulted in less income for college students. If you're looking at that impact, see, this is what we call partial equilibrium analysis. These things are happening, maybe happening at the same time and working against one another. But if you get this version, suppose a recent recession has resulted in less income for college students, well, then definitely what's going on here is that you would have less income would mean less of a demand for these new college textbooks. Maybe they're buying used textbooks, are going without a textbook at all, heaven forbid, right? But this would, again, less income. College students have less income. This may decrease the demand for new textbooks, right, in the college textbook market. And so again, don't forget to look very carefully at the question. It's either an increase in demand or a decrease in demand, depending on which version you get. And don't forget to pull down this menu and label D1 as the original demand, and then the demand decreases. That would cause a surplus of books and lead to a decrease in the equilibrium price to E2, right? And don't forget to pull down and do that. Okay, well, clearly you move, right? You have to draw the new curve and then very carefully label the second demand curve. This is D1, then goes to D2. It's a decrease in demand, and you go from E1 to E2, right? The price and the quantity exchanged in the marketplace would change. Great, we're done with the screencast for chapter 3. Thank you, and good luck on your quiz.